So hello everyone and welcome. This is me, Shmorak, and David Kelly, General Manager at Upsum Originals. We're letting people trickle in, so 2 minutes or so and we'll start. But if you have questions, if you want to say something, then feel free. And I'm going to start the broadcast to my Facebook page. So 1 second while I click all the buttons I need to. By the way, if AppSumo Originals are planning to launch a product that's going to compete with Facebook, I'm going to be a first adopter because whatever they do, Facebook is always so crappy. It's like the worst way to execute something is it's like the good example of bad implementations.
Yeah, there's a lot to that. And I'm sure we'll talk about this too, Adi, but the process for creating originals products is an interesting process. I don't think we will go after Facebook. So Mark Zuckerberg, if you're watching this right now, please don't sue us. Please don't put us out of business. Please don't send a hitman to my door. None of those things need to happen.
Yeah, it's. I think that today, I think that maybe Zuckerberg is the one person that this is like the worst person to get in trouble with.
It is. Yeah, he owns quite a lot. He has his hand in many pots.
Yeah, it can lock you out of everything. So, hi everyone. We have a good crowd. So let's kick this off. My name is Shmorak. I'm a mentor and guide to product market fit. Today with me is David Kelly, General Manager of Upsum Original, and we're going to talk today about something that I think has become even more so important nowadays. That is startup validation. So, David, maybe you can start with just a few words about yourself, Upsum Originals, and we'll start from there.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here, and great both on the live audience and the Facebook audience. Feel free at any point to put questions in the chat. I love jumping back and forth between topics, and we're here to serve you guys, and we're here to talk about business with you guys. So even as I'm talking right now, and I'll explain what Originals is in a second, leave a message, send a chat message. Let us know what you want us to talk about today. Let us know what your biggest issue in your business life is right now. And as for my background, I come from a marketing and a product background. So right now I'm the general manager of AppSum Originals. We're about a $3 million a year business. We have SendFox, we have TidyCal, we have Sumo.com. And our entire existence is about creating products for the underdogs. So creating better products for people who want to transition from very expensive products like MailChimp or Calendly, and they want something that's effective without all the bells and whistles and the high cost. So we're all about empowering new entrepreneurs. We're all about creating products that serve new entrepreneurs. And I've been doing this for about 5 years, and it's been truly the joy of my life. So I'm very, very happy to do this. And thank you for the first question, Shay. We'll talk about that in a little bit, and feel free to send more in.
Excellent. Yes, good questions. We'll get to those questions. Don't worry, and just keep them coming, and we'll go through the chat as we move along. So we had a short conversation before everybody joined, and I said that you described your position kind of an entrepreneur in residence, like the entrepreneur that's working in a not a corporate, but in a company. And this sounds like a dream job. Like, hey, let's build cool new stuff. But that kind of possibilities can also be confusing. So how do you create focus for yourself in terms of what products are we going to build? What products are we going to double down on?
Yeah, it's a great question. So under the Originals umbrella, we have 7 products. And what I think is really interesting, and many of the people watching and listening know this, is that the perception of what an entrepreneur does, or the perception of what entrepreneurship is, and the reality are often very different. So when I tell people, oh, I'm an entrepreneur, I create businesses, they're like, wow, every business must be very successful. You must have a yacht and a private jet. Reality is far removed from that. So the process of creating products for us is knowing that a lot of them will fail. So of the 7 products we have for AppSum Originals, there are 3-ish products that drive about 70% of our results. So when thinking of the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, we see 3 or so of the products are driving about 80%. Now, the ideation process, which we'll talk a lot about, but at a very high level, what we think about is what is successful out there? So what products have market opportunity? And where's the gap between what we want and what exists? So a very practical example is in January of 2021, for a couple of years, I had been kind of eyeing the calendar space. I'd use Calendly, I'd use Book Like a Boss, I'd use You Can Book Me, all these other products. And they were all very expensive for what the value proposition was. And they were all very confusing. I would sign up and it'd be overwhelming. So we saw an opportunity with something like Calendly that makes $70 million a year in ARR. We saw something we could do better. We could come in, we could do simpler, and we could do more effective, and we could serve people who had a tighter wallet. And that was the first part of the identification process. And then we think about what is the feature set that we want to launch. And from the MVP, we continue building as time goes on. So the saying Rome wasn't built in a day very much applies to how TidyCal now is, with tens of thousands of users, and SendFox is very similar with hundreds of thousands of users at this point. That it starts with an idea, it starts with an MVP, and then we iterate from there.
Okay. So TidyCal, for those of you who don't know, this is a booking platform. You have a link, you can create as many as you want. I've been using it for a long time. I used Calendly before, and in terms of functionality, there's no gap for me. From what I got from Calendly, for my own usage, TidyCal is perfect. I got the lifetime deal, which is even better, so I don't have to pay like recurring revenue, which we all know. What was the MVP like for TidyCal? What did it have in store?
Yeah. So the MVP was wild. We created the entire product from start to finish in under 30 days. And there are videos online. Our CEO and founder of AppSumo, Sumo Group in general, Noah Kagan, put a video out on it because we very much worked together on creating that product. And the MVP was very, very basic. So we basically just recreated some very functional but simple calendar scheduling features. And then we iterated over time. So what I think is really important is we think about how do we know a product is going to be successful or not? And TidyCal was a product that was very successful. We've had products that don't have as high of a success. So what we're looking for typically is, even if the MVP is simple, are there early indicators of growth? Are there early indicators of traction? Do we see people starting to use it? Do we see people finding some level of effectiveness, even if they have complaints about bugs and features missing, which is very common after 30 days. And we did see that with TidyCal. We saw the sales right away were pretty good, and they kept getting better as we listened and added more features. And now it's a very successful product. So it was looking and taking the long view for the product as well, knowing that we want indicators, but the indicators are not the end all and be all. There was also just general excitement around the product besides just the KPIs. And that's why we kept building it.
So you mentioned something interesting, and I hope this is going to be a hard question to answer, but you mentioned Noah Kagan, and those of you who don't know, he's a very famous entrepreneur. He's been, since when do we have AppSumo in the world? Is it like, I think like 12, 13 years maybe?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, so, and you mentioned that he posted kind of a post on TidyCal. Now, having a channel, an audience as AppSumo that is a great asset. And can you tell me a little bit how you're using it for validation, and maybe what other entrepreneurs that haven't have that channel can do?
Yeah, totally. So one thing I'm really proud about with our originals team is that we are pretty isolated and siloed from appsumo.com proper. And part of that is to be fair to the other partners. So for those of you who don't know, appsumo.com is basically the Groupon for geeks, is the way we term it. And what that means is they list and sell a lot of software products from other vendors who do lifetime deals. So they're more affordable software deals, so you can stop paying for monthly subscriptions. And especially in this economy, it's very, very important for people to cut their subscriptions. So we're seeing a lot of success around kind of that vision. But the originals team, since we create products that sometimes compete with what is on the AppSumo store, needs to remain a little bit separate from the larger brands so that we don't have any kind of bias and competition. Now, with that said, the reason I mentioned that is because a lot of what we've done to grow originals can be replicated by many people. So let's take SendFox.com, for example. SendFox.com, we created because we were using MailChimp for some of our personal email lists, and MailChimp deliverability was low, support was terrible, and the cost to send emails back then, 4 years ago, was very expensive. Nowadays, it's even more expensive. I was looking at the MailChimp pricing recently and it blew my mind how expensive it is. So when we started SendFox, the thing we did to grow that from zero to what it does now, which is million-ish in revenue a year, something like that, is we really relied on unpaid organic growth hacks and growth methodology. So we did a lot of direct one-to-one outreach. So being creative, I think, is really important. So with SendFox and the direct one-to-one outreach, we would go to people who had newsletters who are arriving in our inbox. Maybe they had a ConvertKit newsletter, maybe they had a MailChimp newsletter, and we would respond to them and say, hey, we built a product that's 50% of the cost of MailChimp and ConvertKit. Do you want us to show you what it is? So we'd respond to those people, and then we'd go to our friends and be like, hey, do you know anyone who has an email newsletter? We're trying to validate this idea, 50% less cost than MailChimp and ConvertKit. Let's just show it to them and see what they want. And that took about 4 or 5 months to really start to get some traction of like heavy outreach and manual processes. But businesses can be grown, and I think this is really important. Businesses can be grown in organic growth hack ways. And what we see now more than ever is a reliance on Facebook ads and Google ads to try to validate ideas. That is not the direction that we recommend people go with. We usually pour gasoline on the fire after the fire started. I think a lot of businesses, unfortunately, pour gasoline too early and then realize that their idea is not great and they burn through a ton of money. And then they end up in the same place that they started, which is with an idea that still isn't that great.
Okay, so when I talk to customers and we're approaching the validation stages, which is usually day one, I always say Facebook is the easiest way. It's the most, usually it's the most expensive or very expensive, but it's very easy because, hey, you can choose the audience, you can put some copy, you can put a value proposition, and you can see if people are biting. It's definitely not an early growth strategy. But again, since you have that connection to AppSumo or to previous clientele, maybe then you have that reach to a channel. But if I don't have that reach, what would you recommend? Because again, validation would always be with the customers, with the market, with the audience. What would be good hacks that worked for you to reach out? Again, you mentioned like those cold calling, but anything else that you think can be helpful for the audience?
Yeah, so there are a few. One is direct outreach, I think, is critical. So it blows my mind how afraid people are, or maybe it's not even fear, maybe it's laziness, maybe it's something else, but going directly to consumers and saying, hey, I have this thing, would you buy this? Okay, you want to buy this? It'll be a $20 deposit, non-refundable if you don't want it. Let's just kind of get some money in hand and creating the product based on what they want. So direct outreach is where I start all the time with any business idea. Anything I start, I'm going to my friends and saying, are you interested in this, or do you know anyone who is? And then some other ideas that I think work very well, starting and kind of creating a newsletter, I think is great to build a brand. So we talk a lot about building brands, right? And building a brand is easier. So speaking of Noah, a lot of the success of AppSumo is because Noah built his personal brand, which he's been doing for 2 decades online. And he's able then to leverage his personal brand into his businesses. So I'd say that's a big one. Other things that we're thinking about as far as cost effectiveness wise, newsletter sponsorships and influencers and affiliates are great. So especially nowadays where the #1 thing that Gen Z wants to be in their life for their career is an influencer is very fascinating to me. Because when you have a lot of people who want to do something, it means that there's an influx of supply and there's opportunity. So we see the ability to go to people and be like, hey, we'll give you 50% affiliate commission or whatever influencer fee based on the results you drive. And because there's a surplus of people that are willing to do that, it's often very effective. So that's another strategy I think about, but really to me, it all starts with direct outreach. I've seen a lot of people who sit and create for years or months or even decades with very little validation. And I know that's against your viewpoint too, Adi. So you and I are really aligned there that you need to validate very early on.
Yeah. One of the things that I can add in terms of ideas for validation and also creating those channels. So you mentioned personal branding. So definitely being out there and sharing and talking about the problem, even if you don't have a solution, if you even set up a webinar and to talk about the problem, the audience is coming because they have this problem, then you're validating, hey, there's a problem there. And people are showing up, people are subscribing to are signing up for the webinar because validation is an issue. Another thing is sometimes, especially for people that are more techie, less marketing, sometimes they can create like quick tools, like a Chrome extension that helps with something, or a cool Excel sheet with all kinds of calculations, or very, very minimal apps that can also track audience, attract audience and have some value. And then you're creating that channel with the audience. But at least at the very early stages, I completely agree with you. You have to create that intimacy with the market, have those conversations and see what they have to say and learn from them what can be the solution that will build your business, not just your product. So
absolutely.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about Tidical and Sandfox. Maybe you can give us some additional examples, maybe for validations that like. So I think that when I talk with customers, when we talk about, okay, what are the experiments that we can do to validate, there's sometimes kind of an internal objection with people to go out into the world. I have nothing to say, it's not ready, it's not pretty, the landing page looks bad, whatever, and they try and postpone and get things off. I think that it also, to some, it feels like validation is something very complex, very heavy, that you have to engineer, that you have to execute perfectly. And I don't think so. My concept is quick and dirty works fine, especially for validation. So if you have examples of like validations that were very fast, very quick, like caught on fire, please share.
Yeah, I love that you said that too, because I think there has become an over-reliance on buzz terminology and buzzwords and complicated strategies. And I think maybe HubSpot and HubSpot's content led the charge in this, and then everyone kind of copies HubSpot's content. And it's so antithetical to like what I believe, because really when I think about marketing, what marketing comes down to for me is who are my customers and where are my customers, right? Like that's all marketing is. And when we think about effectiveness of marketing and buying products, we buy products that solve an issue for us. So I don't know about you guys, but I don't go just spend money on things that like I like have no impact on any issue I have in my life. I go buy food because I'm hungry. I buy a new laptop because I want to be able to see my screen better or work faster or things are slowing down or whatever. So there's some kind of impact in my life. Now, when I think about validation, the first 100 customers to me are very, very manual, very, very manual. And what I'm thinking about with the first 100 customers with what I'm doing is I'm trying to, one, come up with an idea I'm excited about. So seeing the potential for something that I'm excited about, because that's what gets me through, as Seth Godin says, the dip, gets me through what are those challenging moments. So if I'm excited about it, I know that'll kind of cascade outwards and help me create something. And then the second thing I'm thinking about is how do I pattern match what other people want? How do I understand what the most common requests are? Because if we try to do everything for everyone, we actually do nothing. And we've had those products too, and we can talk about some of the failures at some point during this chat. But I'm looking for what are the most common questions, feature concerns, opportunities that we can bring to market, bring to the product feature set. And between those two things, really active listening, understanding the framework of my excitement, pattern matching with the requests that come in from the audience, we find kind of that sweet balance of feature sets. And sometimes it works great, like Tidical is a perfect example of it working great. Sandfox is a perfect example of working great. Other times we realize that our idea and our concept, for a variety of reasons, maybe just doesn't match up, which we've had before too.
How many products did you kill while you were with the originals?
Yeah, we've had, so there have been, it's actually interesting. So we have 3-ish products that really drive 80%, as I mentioned earlier. We have another 3 products or so that are middling successes. So they're not as successful as we thought they'd be. They're kind of somewhere all right. And then we have multiple products, which we've actually spent a lot of time developing. And in one case, even launched publicly to the world, and we shut them down. We turned them off. And that was a really, really hard decision. So we've seen the full gamut of things. And that's okay. That's kind of intentional. When we try things, I think that's what we also have to get right. Where think about what it's like to ride a bike as a child. It's like we're not worrying about understanding everything with a bike and preparation and reading about a bike in a book and then going to see YouTube videos and all these other things. It's like we get on the bike and we keep trying and we keep iterating. And I think that's really important because I think there's this kind of overwhelming sense of being an adult where we have to just do everything to perfection in preparation, when really it's like, how do we set the stage and then how do we launch and iterate as time goes on?
That's great. It's interesting that you mentioned the bike ride. I have a comment on that, but
yeah,
if I want to sum it up, and I think this is kind of what you were talking about and the way that I see it, that validation in a sense is reality check. Yeah, you think they'll come, you think they'll buy. Let's do a reality check. Let's make sure that you're not hallucinating. And the best way is to engage with your audience, either in a kind of inquisitive way, like what's bothering you, what are you trying to do to solve it, does it work for you, why doesn't it work? But also in terms of, hey, I have something to offer for you, will you try it, will you use it, and see if there's kind of that interaction that you're trying to achieve. For those of you who have little kids and you're trying to teach them ride the bicycles, so I have 4 kids, I've done this 4 times, and what I tell them is, at the beginning of the day, that's the first session, let's call it, I say, okay, so for you to know how to ride a bike, you have to fall about 100 times. So let's start, and I'm counting with them, 1, 2, 3, 4. Usually around the 30 mark, they already know how to ride a bike. But I set this kind of a number, and I say, you're going to fail a lot, and eventually you're going to learn. So they expect that failure. They know it's coming. They know it's part of the process. They know that's the dues that they have to pay. And I think with validation, it's the same. You're going to get a lot of no's. You're going to get a lot of doors slammed in your face, and you just have to maybe push through it. You called it the dip. And you mentioned kind of that excitement for a solution. That's what gives you the fuel to go through that dip. That's the momentum that you can gain just by, hey, I'm excited to solve this, and I'm not going to give up that soon. I think that is a key driver in validation, because getting a no is never nice. You can't sugarcoat that. We have a couple of questions. Let's try and deal with them. So Shai is asking, how can we perfect the prototyping process to quickly make our way to product market fit?
Yeah, really interesting question. So there are a couple of things I think about with this one, Shai. One is, I am neurotic with our early customers as far as what they want. So even up until about 50,000 users in SendFox, as part of our automation sequence to those users, one of the first emails that we would send them would be, what's the #1 thing missing in SendFox for you right now? And then when we were, even 4 years ago, when we created SendFox, something in that time range, one of the things I would do is every few days, our first 100-ish customers who are using the product, even earlier in the early days, I would be reaching out to them and saying, what's missing, what's wrong, what's going on? So I would be kind of like the nagging, annoying person to them. And that really helps us understand, how do we perfect that prototyping process to quickly move into the product market fit. The other thing I always think about too is, what is the core of what we want to do for the product? So for example, when we come up with products, it's usually a 1-page document of like, here are the 6 features I want, and here's a high-level vision of this product that I have. And being able to write that down into a 1-page Google document is not only important for being able to share it with a developer or designer, if we're the non-technical founder or for the non-technical team member. It's important for me to take what can be an abstract concept and to bring it into reality. Because the clearer I can explain it, the clearer I understand it myself. So it really starts with clarity on what do we want firstly. And then once we have clarity on what we want firstly, it starts to move into this process of, how can I continue to be the crazy person constantly asking my early customers, what's wrong, what's missing, what do you want? And by the way, I'll mention this really quick. There's a great book by Ryan Levesque called Ask. And a lot of my frameworks for talking to customers is built in this way. And the key to keep in mind there is, people are really bad at saying what, like, they they want to happen with something, because then they'll just start listing all these things that they know from other tools. People are really great at telling you about past experiences and what the number one thing they hate is. So when we did the SendFox thing, it was like, what's the number one thing that's missing for you? Because that takes it out of this abstract, okay, like, let me tell you all the features I want, to like, this thing I'm doing right now in SendFox is really annoying.
Yeah, thank you. I'll add maybe my perspective on that. I think that you mentioned Ask. I didn't read this book, but it's not the first time I hear of it. But first of all, when we talk to customers and going back to that prototyping process, you want to work with your customers and let them play with it. You don't want to guide them too much. You want to see how they interact with it. And usually your customers, you can ask them, what would you like to have in the product? And they would say, I want everything. That's a common answer. I want this and I want that. So the questions would be, what are you using now? I'm using MailChimp. What do you hate about MailChimp? What is missing from MailChimp? Are you using this feature? Maybe there are a lot of things that are not needed in MailChimp. So you can figure out from that, incorporate it into the prototyping process to kind of fine tune it. I think that, and again, I think like in the Lean methodology, the initial prototypes for an MVP especially, they need to be very lean, very minimal. Let's find out what you have to do, what are you using like 90% of the time, and let's put that in the product, launch it, and then add whatever is missing. So I would also, once you're launching the MVP, make sure that you have a clear communication channel with the audience so they can shout at you, and that's a good thing. If they say, well, your product is not good, okay, I'll fix it, just tell me, it's a good thing. I think another point to mention is, we're talking about like best practices, things that you need to do, but there are also things that you should be very, very wary not to do. And those would be asking for intentions, asking for opinions, talking about the future. Would you do this? Would you do that? You'll get a lot of bias. And another thing is, be very, very cautious not to introduce your bias into anything. You're interacting with the customer, you're showing them the prototype. Try and be as like looking from the outside in and letting them take lead and just watch them. So don't be too guiding, because you'll add bias, and the more guidance you give them, the more bias you'll get in return, and that's a dangerous thing. So we have another. Want to comment, David?
No, I think that's totally true.
Yeah. Okay, so there's another question or request to talk about the balance between talking to potential customers and building MVPs. So at what point have we spoken enough and we talk to everyone? Is there a point in time that this actually happens?
So I think we should always have a loop with our customers. And even now, as a $3 million a year business with a dedicated support team, every week I'm looking in our support system to understand what people want. And we have spreadsheets and kind of some organization around road mapping too. I'm pretty heavily involved in that. And the reason is because I don't want to lose sight of what the vision for the product is and how customers are engaging with the product. Because again, it goes back to what we talked about. People buy things that impact their lives, that solve an issue for them. And that issue is typically time or money, although there are other issues that are kind of secondary. But we're often thinking about that. So I don't think the process ever ends. I do think what is a word of caution, and this is kind of the art and science of startups, is how do we know when we're getting too much feedback and how do we stick to our guns? So there are some features in SendFox and TidyCal that have been asked about for a very long time that I just don't think fit the ethos of what we want to do. And we might do them at some point, but I just can't think of a great way to do them and still stick to the vision of what we want, which is affordability and simplicity with the product and effectiveness. So we might do it, we might not, but there's a point where we have to make a distinction. And that differs for every business. I don't think there's a hard and fast rule of when we know that point is. What I do think there's a hard and fast rule on is, are we consistently engaging with our customers? Because usually what happens is when we start to see sales go down, or when we see sales not taking off, that's a lagging indicator to decisions that we made as a leading indicator. And we make better decisions when we're more in tune with the people buying our product. So I think it's great to stay connected with customers and users and prospects very, very closely.
Well, again, things that I recommend my customers doing is put a process in place that will get you conversations with customers at least once a week. More at the beginning, less when you're a busy CEO with 200 employees, but you still need that process in place. And that can be an automation on LinkedIn saying, hey, I'm working on solving this and that. If you're interested in chatting, I would love to share. Whatever it works, and you can fine tune it as time goes by, but whatever it works, just so you'll have a couple of meetings in your calendar, whether you have no product or you're a CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, have that in place to get that constant feedback from the audience. And I think that the way that I explain to my customers is that you have to have assumptions in your head. Whenever you're talking to someone, you can have those kind of exploratory conversations and trying to figure out the ecosystem or whatever, but you should have an assumption. Maybe the assumption is that the chief information security officer in the organization is your go-to person. So when you're having those conversations, you're at the back of your head, is that assumption correct? How can I validate it? And so going back to that balance, if you feel that you have validated that enough, and it's not 100% confidence level, but let's say it's 60, 70, you feel fairly confident, you've spoken to enough people and you think that the CISO is the right person, then move on. You don't need to follow up on that assumptions. You should have new assumptions ready to go. But so the way that you determine where to put my focus on building the feature or validating the assumptions, it starts with an assumption. If you don't have an assumption in your head that you're validating in conversations and interactions, then you're not making the most of those interactions.
Yeah. And there are a couple questions I want to hit on this too, because I've seen a couple B2B specific questions. So one from Doron, I believe, not sure if I can pronounce that correctly. And then the other one from Sefi about B2B. So, and sorry, by the way, if I butcher the names. B2B is interesting because here's what I think about B2B. I get questions about B2E and B2B quite often. The process to me is pretty similar in a lot of ways. So when we think again about marketing, who are my customers? Where are my customers? And then the third step is, what do people really want? Why would they move? I think a lot of times when we create businesses, what we often forget is like, we have this idea, we're so excited to bring this to the world, and we're like, everyone is going to want this. What I'm really thinking about often with businesses, and this is especially important for B2B and B2E, is what does my potential customer want? So for example, I get pitched all the time on B2B and B2E products, as I'm sure many of you do. And I'm like, yeah, I don't really have time to like jump on a 45-minute call with you and like hear about everything, unless it's very compelling. So the things that are really compelling typically for B2B and B2E right now, think about this, right? So the economy is in a weird place. People are scrambling to save money, to cut costs. And they're also scrambling to keep growing, right? So how do we come into our products with that mindset? And knowing that B2B and B2E is a little more sensitive and the threshold is a little higher than a $19 product is important to keep in mind. So how do we keep that in mind while also understanding what our audience or prospective customers want? The process, I think, of understanding and talking and communicating and direct outreach is still pretty similar. The bar is a little higher to pass, and I think we need a little more sensitivity on making sure we understand what would be compelling to get this prospective customer to take action.
I think just to add a bit on that, I think that in terms of B2B, we have the best solution that anyone can use, which is LinkedIn. It has so much power in B2B. You can reach out to anyone, and there are a lot of automation tools and a lot of frameworks that you can use to leverage LinkedIn. And even if you're approaching, I think the limit is 20 per day. So run it for 2 weeks on automation, do it manually, whatever works for you. In 2 weeks, 14 days, 20 people per day, you're reaching out to almost 300 people. And I think that the main use case, and you mentioned it, it has to really resonate. It has to be something that keeps me up at night. And you're saying, hey, I have a solution for whatever is keeping you up at night. So when you make that approach and you ask for that connection, make it friendly, make it personalized, and then say, hey, I'm helping companies like company name improve their problem name. And of course, a lot of the people are going to disregard it, a lot. And that is where you need to go through that deep. You need your stamina, your grit, whatever, to push through. But if you reach 300, you might get 5 calls. And 5 calls, it's not a lot, but it's a good start. And then you can start validating. And then you can see whether what I'm working on is actually interesting and are my assumptions on the nose or not. So LinkedIn is a powerful tool for validating B2B businesses or solutions. I think there was another one. What about B2B and specifically when selling to top executives? How do you validate before they are a customer? So I myself don't have a lot of experience selling to executives. I can add my own 2 cents as a product manager. When customers come to me and they have this product for C-level or managers, and I'm saying, okay, who's the buyer, who's the main decision maker, and what's in it for him in terms or her in terms of functionality? And sometimes there is nothing. And I think that from the product perspective, you have to make sure that whoever is paying for the product, it might not be the executive, it might be the team leader or C-level or VP. Make sure that there's a report, a digest, an overview, a recommendation, something in terms of functionality. So next time he signs that check for you, he knows, yes, we need that. And he doesn't have to say, what the hell am I paying for? So maybe that's another way of looking at that B2B and high-level sales. Make sure there is something in it for them as well, and not just for the lower tiers in the company.
Yeah, it's a great point. And here's another thing that's interesting that I have been thinking about a lot recently, especially as the world kind of opens up past this COVID pandemic, is how do we build our network and our connections and create kind of those mastermind groups? So one great way to approach how to build a B2B product and get B2B customers is find a company that you really admire in the B2B space, find one of their salespeople on LinkedIn and just shoot them a message. Hey, I'm trying to get into the B2B space. I'm just really curious if you have any advice for me. So many of my connections in the entrepreneurial space have been when approaching other people with humility, they will often share their secrets. So don't underestimate that you're able to reach out to people. And when we ask authentically and vulnerably, I think a lot of people help.
In Israel, I think even more so because we're a small ecosystem. And when I started my let's call it apprenticeship, whatever, in product market fit, I just reached out to all kinds of people on LinkedIn and said, hey, I'm doing this lifelong research on product market fit and I'm super interested in your perspective. Can we have a call? And I got some amazing phone calls and video calls with people that are top notch, CEOs and founders of unicorn company and others that have tried and succeeded, tried and failed. And you're right, giving that authentic approach definitely works. And I think in the Israeli ecosystem, it works even better. There's a question from Lee Juravin about the most popular mistake that people are doing in validation. So I'll share mine in a nutshell, but I'll let you continue. For me, I think it's people are overthinking it, but that's my kind of, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I'm just reading Lee's comment right now. What is the most popular thing about validation people often mistake about? Yeah, what a great question, Lee, because what I think is really important too to understand is like when others zig, we zag. And what that means is so much of the red ocean strategy out there of just competing in these really crowded markets is the opposite of what we want in marketing. So how do we think in different ways? How do we think with the blue ocean strategy, as it's called? I'd say my most common thing about validation, which I've harped on a few times, is scaling before the need to scale. So the CTO, the co-founder of AppSumo and Sumo Group, is this really smart guy named Chad Boyda, which Noah has featured a few times on his podcast, and he's a little bit behind the scenes. But he would always say something to me that I think about. And he said, everyone worries about scale before they have to actually scale. If only we're so lucky to scale, then we worry about scale. It's like people are thinking about $1 billion business before they even have customer number 7. So my biggest thing with validation, and I think the biggest mistake about validation, is be where you are. make sure that if you have 0 customers, you're doing things that help you move from 0 to 1. When you have 1 customer, you're thinking about 0 to or 1 to 3 typically, because your first 2 customers are usually your family or friends. Then from 3, we're thinking about 20. Then from 20, we're thinking about 50. And then from 50, we're thinking about 100. And then around 100 is usually where we start to get some automation and marketing processes in place. But the first 50 to 100 are usually very, very manual. Friends of friends, friends in our network, a person we know, former coworker, current coworker, whatever it is, we're like really harboring that. So remember to be where you are. And if scale becomes an issue, which you know it'll become an issue because you're like, I'm making so much money and I have all these people and I'm very stressed and I need to hire someone. Then you worry about scale. But don't worry about scale before you even can start crawling.
I think that as a startup, you at the beginning, validation, I think, is about the near term, what's in front of me, because you're like walking in a dark forest, everything is foggy, you don't see the tree above you, in front of you. So you don't have to kind of, how do I get to the top? No, just make sure you're not stumbling on anything and then you're not breaking any leg. So again, like looking at the very, very near future, instead of thinking of problems that you're not even there yet. I completely agree with that. There's an interesting question from Shai about the first signs that you have reached product market fit. So maybe you can connect it with the Tidical, for example. When was that? Was there a morning that you woke up, you looked at the dashboard and said, yes, this is, was that kind of a moment of epiphany, or is it kind of confidence that's slowly growing?
Yeah, I've seen both happen. So with Tidical specifically, what I think is very telling of businesses and the way we think about businesses often is we have this wonderful blend between what can we not stop thinking about and what do we want to solve for ourselves and what do we see a market opportunity for. And market opportunity can mean the solutions out there are too expensive. The solutions out there are missing some key features. The solutions out there aren't good enough. They're too buggy, whatever it is. It's kind of a broad term to say there's an opportunity, but it can be an opportunity in any of those realms. So with Tidical, we knew we reached product market fit because 1, I love the product. So on day 1, I started using the product instead of Calendly, which to me is very telling. And then the second indication for me was we saw a good amount of customers above what we expected start to come in. And in those early days, you know, people are refunding at a much higher rate than typically is normal. But the interest was compelling enough that we were like, oh, this is really interesting. Let's kind of go on. Let's keep going forward. And those exact numbers vary from business to business, so they don't matter as much. It's more of an indication of, are we seeing growth and are we thinking about growth? So one thing I remember seeing on LinkedIn recently from someone who buys businesses is he said, the thing I'm always looking for when I buy businesses is that their revenue is either flat or increasing. I never buy a business whose revenue is decreasing, because that is a sign of a business that is very hard to turn around. If things in SaaS are decreasing, it's a sign that like things are not generally great. So maybe it isn't like up into the right hockey stick growth. Maybe it's just like little indications, but you're still growing, or you're kind of flat to growing, that are really compelling. So it does depend on the business, but those are some things I think about to understand if you've reached product market fit.
So in terms of analytics or metrics, that would be retention, that would be organic growth. Can you maybe tell about the growth that you're seeing in Tidical? How much of it is paid? How much of it is organic?
Yeah, so it is, you're right that we are kind of looking at growth. For Tidical, for originals, we don't do any paid advertisements. We don't have any paid spend. Everything for the most part has been organic. There are some things that appsumo.com does where they feature us in some ad sets along with other products, but it's pretty minimal. So we're looking at those indicators really of how things are going. And the other thing is, like, we're not necessarily just looking at metrics that indicate like pure growth percentages. We're also looking at general excitement behind the product. So are people excited to use the product? Do we get comments every once in a while like, hey, I love this product. Like, this is really good, but it's missing this one thing. or I've used this to replace my daily calendar tool. So I think what we can lose sight of sometimes in marketing is we're looking at the quantitative data a little too much. So what I'm also thinking about is how do we understand qualitatively how people feel about products? Because marketing and product market fit and switching to a product isn't purely a logical decision, it's also an emotional one. So how do we make sure we're understanding how people feel? Is this something they love? Is this something they kind of hate? Where do they feel about the product? Which is why, going back to what we said earlier, I'm always asking questions in those early phases. How are you liking this? What's the number one thing that's missing? If we shut down shop tomorrow, would you be disappointed, or would you just find something else that is replaceable?
That's good. When I talk about product market fit, and I say product is value and market is pain, and you want to make sure that they match. And when I talk about value, I break it down to two axes in which you have kind of the emotional value and the functional value. So if you're going to a gas station and they offer you that additive, that oil additive, whatever, to make the engine run smoother, then that's very functional, but it doesn't have a lot of emotional value. But if you're looking at a product that like products that we love, maybe it's your iPhone, maybe it's your Audible account, maybe it's Netflix, whatever that is, it's not just functional. There's also an emotional value attached to it, and that is what allows you to enjoy, I think, better retention. People love the product, they will stick to it. Maybe premium pricing, you can charge more. So when we think about the value that we're creating for the customers, it's not just the functional value, it's the feel-good value that we can create. And it's in the language that we're communicating with them. It's the way that the product is. If we take it maybe not as seriously as others and we make it a little bit more fun. So there can be, I launched a survey that was sort of a lead gen. And I made it as cute as I can, with like small things like, hey, you want good karma, maybe you share it with your friends and karma will earn you a trip to the Bahamas or something of that. So like small things along the survey, and people respond and say, wow, this was so much fun. This was nice. This was great. Like, you don't usually get responses on a survey, and they were sharing it. So I think that one of the things that you need to validate is, and maybe it's not for any customer, or maybe it's more in B2C, but can you get them excited about it, like you said? And measuring it, there's no product metrics for it. And even NPS doesn't work, I think, for that excitement level. But when you go on a call with them, and when you give them the channel and they say, wow, I love this product, this is great, that's where you can get the feedback and see that you're on your way to product market fit, maybe as an indicator.
Totally.
Excellent.
Yeah, totally.
So I don't know why we have some promotion. I'm not sure if it's a question or not, but Merav, if it's a question, please rephrase it as a question. Maybe just another note, since the question has PMF in it, I'll add a little bit more, Shai. So there are a few signs for product market fit that you can see in the data. So retention is, of course, that. And usually product market fit means that you have good organic growth. People are enjoying your product, they're sharing it with their friends. So either NPS or the amount of organic traffic that you're getting can also be good indicators. There's the famous survey from Sean Ellis that asked like a very specific, I think it's a very smart question to ask. How disappointed would you be if you could no longer use this product? And there are 4 options, and the top option says very disappointed. And you want to get the benchmark in the industry is around 40%. You want at least 40% of your audience saying, I would be very disappointed. And I can say, I would be very disappointed if I couldn't use TidyCal. I would have alternatives, but I wouldn't enjoy them as much. They would be more expensive. They wouldn't necessarily offer more functionality. So whatever the reasons are, that's the outcome of me not being able to use TidyCal. So we have just a few more minutes. Let me see if there are any questions that we missed.
Yeah, I think there are a couple more. And one is, so from Matan asking about recommendations for automation tools. I don't have any offhand, Matan. It's a great question. What my suggestion is I think now economically with price sensitivity, my suggestion for basically every tool everyone has is go to appsumo.com and find if there's an alternative for a single one-time price versus paying monthly for it. I don't have any strong recommendations for a specific tool though, so you could probably find one of many that work.
We have a friend in the community that is the founder of Linvo, Linvo.
Nice.
And I think he's also on the AppSumo platform. I have his lifetime deal. And it gives you the ability to launch kind of nurture campaigns over LinkedIn. So definitely check it out, Linvo. And I think we have the coupon code in the community. So that's also a good offer. There's another question from Omer. If I have validated my ID manually, how much confidence can it give me in creating the app?
Yeah, great question. And sorry, Omer, I saw that you posted this earlier too. We didn't get to it quite yet. I think this should give you a lot of confidence. There are actually two questions I'd ask here. One is, what does validating an idea manually mean to this level? Does this mean that you have a couple people who are like, yeah, I'm kind of interested? Or does this mean you have 10 people who are like, hey, as soon as you build this product, I will give you money. Here's a $20 deposit right now. So what I think we have to be careful about with validation is understanding when our friends are just being nice to us and when validation is actually real. So I would say, depending on the type of validation you have, maybe go back and get deposits, refundable deposits, to really get skin in the game. And if you're getting that, then I would say confidence in creating the app is very high level. What I would caution you is, when building the app, remember to build it with MVP functionality. So the app can always grow and expand over time. What you want is to keep costs low at the beginning and make sure that you're hitting on the core feature set that you identified is most critical to your customer. And then expanding over time is very valuable. Oh, I love this question about Reddit from y'all. Do you want to add anything to that, to Omer's question, Adi, before we jump to y'all?
Yeah, I think that, again, you touched upon this, and I'll maybe elaborate just a little bit in terms of what's the quality of the validation, maybe. So the way that I see, there are four main areas of assumptions that we have and need to validate. The first one that we need to start it with is with the market. And under that market assumptions is, what is the pain that we're solving, and try to describe it from the word of the customer and not our own words. And then maybe who's the ideal customer profile. If it's a B2B, then who's the buyer, who's the user, and again, what's in it for them would be the definition of the pain. And those would fall under the market assumptions. Then you have the value proposition assumptions, because they are in pain. This is the problem. They have a headache. What can I offer them that will gain their attention? Because they're already trying different things. So you don't know what offering would pique their interest. And you can try it. You can try it with marketing campaigns. You can try it with conversations. You can try it with LinkedIn approach. So you have those value proposition assumptions that you need to validate. Then you have the product. And I think that one of the mistakes, back to Lee's question, what's common mistake? People start with the product. They have those concepts about the product, but you're not building a product. A startup is not a product. A startup is a business. It's a highly scalable business, but it's a business. And product is just one leg to stand on. You need the problem and the value proposition and the ideal customer profile, and then the product. And in an MVP, it doesn't have to be an app or something technological. It can be just, I don't know, an Excel sheet or something manual or a newsletter. Whatever eases their pain can still have value. It's still an MVP. So not necessarily go and work on a code or a solution that can be scalable later on. Maybe your MVP is even smaller than that, because an MVP is also validating product assumptions. And then you have the business assumption. You want to make sure that while you're creating value, you're getting it back in some way or form, either as revenue or data or users or whatever. So that's my additional 2 cents.
Great 2 cents, yeah. And this Reddit question, I want to answer this. This is such a good one, because I love Reddit. Reddit is so interesting for validation. So really great identification of Reddit in the first place for product market fit. I would say a couple things. One is, I think we have to be careful with how we engage and interact with Reddit. As many people have probably seen on Reddit, there is like a rabid fan base of very, let's say, like strong purists who want Reddit to be nothing ever but like a internet community.
Don't mess with the Redditors.
Yeah, don't mess with the Redditors, exactly, like Adi said. So I think, first of all, the identification that we should use Reddit is a great one. I would say a couple things. One is, so here's a great example. right? I have a friend who created a sunscreen for surfers. And what he wanted to do was validate the idea. So he went to the surfing subreddit and just searched for sunscreen. And from there, he would find recent topics that were within the past maybe day or couple days and leave a comment like, hey, you know, we actually created this. And like, here are some other products we really love too. So it's not just an advertisement, it's more of a process of kind of sharing. If I were earlier stage and trying to find product market fit, I would actually message people who created that topic and say, hey, funny you wrote this. I'm actually thinking about creating a business around this. Can I like talk to you for 10 minutes? Or can I just shoot like a couple message over to you via Reddit messages? And a lot of people, if it's authentic, they'll say yes. They'll be like, sure, yeah, I'll tell you what I want. I think people get put off when they think it's going to be a sales pitch, which I can understand. So maybe if you have an idea, you can say, hey, I have a couple questions. And then you ask the questions and you're like, by the way, if you're interested, feel free to sign up here and I'll let you know more as I think about it, but like no pressure. So great question about Reddit.
I think that Reddit can be also used kind of a general name because the same applies, for example, for Quora. Quora is a question platform. So you can find questions that are around the problems that you're trying to solve. For example, a question about what's a good sunscreen lotion for surfers or something of that sort. So you can also use Quora and not just Reddit and other forums as well. All those places, if your target audience, if your ideal customer profile is hanging in those places, you go there, you try and mingle, you try and go one-on-one in DMs, like direct messages, Discord channels and Slack channels that are public. These are all places that you can go for validation, and you can start just by listening, and when the time is right, just send a message and try to go to the next level. I think that one of the less used validation, let's call them platforms, is the App Store and the Play Store, because, and not just them, all the comparison and review platforms on software, because you can go and check out MailChimp's app on the App Store and see what people are saying when they give it 5 stars and what they say when they give it 1 star, and you can get a feel of what's going on and what's missing and what's good, and work your way from there. So it's not 100% validation, but it's another piece of the puzzle. We have just a few more minutes, but there is a big question that I was hoping to get to, and so let's try and get to it. So we all know that valuations now are going down and investors are looking for more, I think, certainty. And so from your experience, if a startup wants to be able to raise funds, how can validation serve him, and what can be considered like, okay, that's good in terms of an investor, not just for myself as a startup founder, but from an investor's perspective, maybe that's good validation, that's not enough.
Oh boy, yeah, what a great place to start. What I think has become more and more important is that we are becoming more aware of the lifestyle businesses that are really unprofitable are just not great investments. So I would say what has become increasingly important is lean teams, profitable businesses, period. Actually, I could probably just stop there. So what I would be very, very cautious about when you're seeking investors, or when you're thinking about scaling the business or selling the business or whatever, is one, if you can secure rounds now, do it, is something I'm generally hearing from my friends, and I'm thinking as well. So if you need rounds right now and you have good terms, do it. The other thing is just really hyper focus on how you reach profitability. So historically, people were able to really raise on just like growth concepts, like users at all costs, kind of Uber's infamous approach that cascaded out to many other businesses. There's a lot more to kind of unpack there, but at a very high level, I think good business fundamentals are becoming increasingly important. So don't hemorrhage money, make sure you're spending in the right places, make sure you're really pouring gasoline on the fire in the right places with profitability more than anything.
Okay, that's great. There's one question that we're not yet answered. You have a few more minutes, just so.
Yeah, let's do it.
What is your take on a purely digital validation approach? For example, driving users to a website, asking them to sign up for waitlist without any in-person chat.
Yeah, that can work also. To the anonymous attendee who wrote that. So that can work also. What I would be careful about is I hear this thing a lot where people are like, man, I have 40,000 people on my wait list. I have like 20,000 page views a month. And it's like the first thing I think, having created businesses before, is like, I don't care what you have on your wait list or whatever. Like your conversion rate is going to be so much lower when you ask people to pay money versus them just putting an email address. So, like I've mentioned a few times, I would try to get skin in the game where you can. So even if it's digital, it's like, can you get them to put down a deposit? Hey, just put down $20 right now. It's totally refundable if you don't get the product in the next X months, but this just helps us make sure that you're serious and save your spot, something along those lines. Kind of like with the Tesla or Ford Lightnings or whatever they did where they got some deposits. So I would think about that. I would say purely digital, there's no real downside to that as long as you're validating in the correct way, which is you're actually getting skin in the game. And you're realizing that if you're not getting skin in the game, that no matter the waitlist size, I would set expectations accordingly. That I've seen people with waitlists of thousands of people that lead to 0 signups, 0 conversions. So we just have to make sure to manage expectations and help set up processes so that when we get product market validation, we're getting it in the right way.
I actually have a different opinion, not by much. I think that the only downside or the main downside for a purely digital validation is that you're missing out on a lot of lessons that you can learn by interacting with your audience. So what you're actually validating is that I can build a no-touch funnel, and that's fine. That's definitely something. If your product has low margins and you need something that is no-touch, then definitely by all means run that experiment. But at the end of the experiment, at the end of the funnel, make a few phone calls just so you learn a bit more, maybe just to optimize the funnel, maybe you'll discover new things. So never, again, that's my kind of approach. Never let go completely of that intimate relationship with audience, no matter what the product is, no matter how big you are. Always make sure that you have some traction with them. And that's maybe the main point against doing something that is purely digital. Make sure you're not missing on those learning opportunities. So totally. Yeah, David, we are out of time. I had a blast. Thank you for joining us all the way from sunny California. This was, as Oren says, this was insightful. And thank you for all the people who joined us. Thank you for your time. Last day of the week, 8:30. It's the end of everything. So I really appreciate it for your coming, and thank you everyone. Thank you, David. And I hope we'll get another chance to have you here as a keynote speaker. And take care, David.
Yeah, thank you guys. And I'll give my website, dmkthinks.org. You guys can find me and email me there. So if there are any questions we didn't get to and you just want to, and I put in the chat, by the way, you want to ask a question that we didn't get to, I can answer questions all day. I love talking about business and startups. So find me on my website. You'll find an email address on there and you can shoot me an email. And we can talk more, but thank you so much for attending. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone. And enjoy the weekend.
Thank you, guys. See ya.
Bye-bye.